title of the talk is Ontology of Consciousness, Unified Physical Reality Perspective. Let's begin.
Right. Thank you, Maria.
Yes.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, we see.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go on this pen. All right. So the topic is on ontology of consciousness in light of Indian knowledge systems perspective. To begin with, if you ask a simple question that pertains to ontology, which is what exists or what is consciousness, we get three types of answer. The first one is consciousness emerges from the biophysical processes of evolution connected to the brain and nervous system. The second one is consciousness comes from the physical events of the cosmos, all the way from quantum to astronomical scales. They are governed by physical laws, but they are yet to be understood fully. And the third type of answer, which is more on the philosophical side, is consciousness is a separate entity, primordial to the cosmos, and it is not reducible to any physical laws. And there are intermittent answers available too. So this presentation focuses on how to unify these views. Is there a perspective that we can bring in, understand all three of them? So to continue, this is how the talk is organized. I will first speak a little bit about the purpose of the talk. Then I will cover the ontological portion by introducing a nature of reality that comes from Indian knowledge system, and then address some of the pertinent concepts in systems theory. Then I will move on to mind. Then we will touch upon epistemology. And finally, we believe this theory needs a little bit of careful attention to nomenclature. So that's something that I will cover. First, the intent of the talk, if you look at the research process per se, it all starts with hypothesizing, and then it moves to making observation, measurements, correlation, and finally causation. The real life experiments would cover observation, correlation, etc., but hypothesis always occurs in the mind. The most prominent example is from the Newton. Apple falls, the observation is falling down. We can compute, we can correlate a lot of things about such an event, but the hypothesis that Earth attracts was actually in the mind. 150 years later, somebody else came in and they said, it's not the attraction, but it is the space-time curvature. And then we have to change the hypothesis to describe the same process of observing and correlating. So on the other realm of philosophy, we have philosophers sometimes speaking about cosmic origin, order of function, consciousness, etc. And recent findings are showing that these types of observations are rather coming from the lowest possible frequencies of EEG. So the question here is, can we feed these facts that comes from the philosopher's EEG experience to the hypothesizing process? And this way we can unify the ideas of scientists with the philosophers. That's the purpose of the talk, and that's what governs the flow as we go forward. Now, to begin with, to nature of reality in Indian knowledge system, this was touched upon by many people in the conference already. So primordial space, there is a space called primordial space, similar to the super space of Wheeler's work, that exists beyond cosmos. It's of internal energy. This pure internal energy can be experienced as all surrounding compression on matter. Then moving forward, the space is a continuum of internal energy. As we discussed, it's at Planck scale fluctuations. Now we will start to speak about the particle genesis as it is inferred in several texts of Indian knowledge systems. Owing to the pressure and energy differentials, local peaks form in this continuum, and the peak fractionates to form multitudes of quanta. The quanta produced are subjected to the energy pressure pulses. They are compacted to form a pack, and this pack is what we call fundamental particle. I hope it's visible. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. And the quanta produced is subjected to the energy pressure pulses from all around, compacted to form a pack, and this is the so-called fundamental particle in mainstream science. Again, the same pressure energy pulses acting on the fundamental particle, they cause spin, and owing to the spin, the quanta from the periphery of the forming pack, they tend to escape radially. And such an escaping event is limited by the continuum's potential energy, and this forms a field around the particle as it is shown here. So according to Indian knowledge system, a particle will always be observed as a pack and a field associated with occurring in a continuum, right? So with this backdrop, I mean, you will find this information in multiple versions of Indian knowledge system. Three notable ones: Vedatri, it comes from the 1950s, Yogananda around the same time, Vivekananda almost 60, 70 years before. If you're going to if you're going to move back in time to find out similar facts, then there would be challenges with respect to interpretivism, which is somebody may interpret the same text in one way, someone else may interpret it in another way. But these three are rather would be in lines with a scientific interpretation. Right. So then we move on to the pertinent concepts in consciousness. The first one is emergentism. As we know, this is a phenomenon where unprecedented novel properties start to emerge when we put elementary parts together and we let them interact. So in this case, we think the quanta that accrues, it comes up as an emergence called mass. Gravitation is an energy balance between the spin system and the pressure continuum all around. Charge is actually the quanta diffusion resulting as the particle's field and its energy. So we're starting to have emergence in terms of mass, charge, gravitation, etc., owing to the self-compression of the space itself. And moving forward with emergentism results in something very important according to Indian philosophical system. This is called as duality. For example, the picture on the left is a very big lake in the United States, and there is a vortex forming, there is a local rotation in the water flow. When you look at the system, if you ask a simple question to a kid, what do you see? He would describe it as a single entity. He would say a lake made of water and there is a local spin. The nature's event of coming out as a particle is the same. It's a local quantum spin of the continuum owing to a pressure peak. But when we ask a scientist, what do you see? He would say, there are two things I see. I see a continuum and I see a particle. This is called as duality in Indian philosophical system. So as long as the continuum alone persisted, it's singular. And then the way mind perceives it, there are two entities that would come up. That's called as the duality, right? And moving forward, the fundamental forces are described as the two becoming the four, which is gravity, electromagnetism, strong and weak nuclear forces. Now, in most of the cases, we've seen that the quanta pack and the spin and the radial reflex, the interaction between two packs leads to these four forces, ideally from a system science perspective, although there could be other physical laws governing it. One thing that Indian knowledge system has to offer is the entire thing happens in the sea of energy, and the sea of energy is actually at a state of vibration, and there would be a pressure applied at a pulsatory scale on this event. So accounting for this particular information in many of the mainstream text is actually missing. Now, the next step in system science would be the reductionism. Like this is describing a complex phenomena in terms of its simple or fundamental constituents. So there are several qualitative studies done around Indian knowledge system text, and we find a singular entity, this is the space itself. Yesterday, people made similar conclusions in terms of vacuum energy, zero-point energy, so on and so forth. But it is a singular entity, and it has four properties and dimensions. One is the plenum. It says the energy is available everywhere and it's ample. And the second one is the energy of the continuum. The third one is the most important point. This is the consciousness. We believe it reflects via a specific vibration pattern. And this vibration pattern is the one that causes local pressure peaks, and that's where a quantum spin occurs. And a localized quantum spin is seen as particle in mainstream science. And the fourth one, vibration. Vibration brings in the phenomena of time into the continuum. So time becomes a property of that singular continuum. Now, this is the best possible way to reduce. We believe that there is no further level of reductioning or reducing possible other than these four, right? So now the next thing, when we put elementary particles together and visualize that as a system, there sometimes appears what we call order of function. Now, the premise is that consciousness is the order of function. This comes from both the, let's say, meditation sciences, as well as from physics perspective. If we approach that with reasoning or even with direct experience, yesterday some people were talking about experiential knowledge also, it would yield a view that such an order is a direct result of the local resonant events of the primordial space. And there are subsequent interactions after the particle emission occurs. So the question of what is consciousness is actually shifting from the order of function in the cosmic forms to this primordial form, which is at a state of vibration. So if you think in these lines, inception of the cosmos from this primordial form itself turns out to be a conscious event because we find pattern, precision, and regularity in the way the vibration occurs, in the way the resonant peaks occur in this primordial continuum, right? So to summarize, I mean, this is not the end of the presentation, but we have digested quite some information, so it's good to summarize at this point in time. So the primordial space, it has inherent potential energy. Such a formless energy state is surrounding the cosmos. This is what was shared as emptiness by the previous speaker, one of the previous speakers. And there is quantum scale vibration, and thereby this continuum integrates time in it. And there is localized energy intensification occurring with periodicity. This would mean there is fundamental particle emissions from this continuum. And consciousness is an inherent quality of primordial space. It reflects via the vibratory patterns. And cosmos origin itself is a conscious event arising out of space, local pressure energy peaks. And the particles that come out, they have definite properties. This process repeats itself very consistently so that in these particles we find the properties repeating in terms of pattern, precision, and regularity. So this is what we have looked at from the Indian knowledge system perspective so far. Now we will move to a specific order of function. This is mind. And in light of that, we will look at two aspects that are pertinent to the consciousness theory. First, mind in a biosystem, the cumulative energy flux of the quantum space. For example, this pack and the field, when we say the energy flux, we are talking about the field. And the field of the cell matrix, it interacts with space. So space is all around. The entire biosystem is submerged in this continuum. That's how it has to be visualized. And as a result of this interaction, this field starts to spin around the body. And that's what forms the bounded field. And this field is what we call the mind. And that I've represented with this second circle around. In general, yesterday we saw lots of trillion photographs, etc., which were trying to capture this field. So from this perspective, mind pertains to the field, whereas the molecules and the atoms of brain and other parts of the body would pertain to the pack or the particle that we're talking about. Now, in light of this clarity, if you look at Cartesian dualism would say there are two separate foundations. One is mental and another one is physical. As we can see, body, the foundations are particle, mind, the foundation is the field associated with the particle, and both the particle and the field are actually arising out of space, which is internal energy. So this is technically monism. Everything is arising out of a single entity, and therefore there is no dualism as far as the Indian knowledge system is concerned. The next one is hard problem of consciousness and why it remains hard. You know, this problem deals with the relationship between the physical phenomena, let's say this is the brain processes, be it microtubules vibrating, or chemical synapse, or electrical synapse, and the actual qualia, the way we see things. Now, we believe there is a missing link, and that missing link is actually this quanta. This quanta makes up the biofield, and there could be several events occurring in this biofield, be it coherence, be it superposition. If qualia has to be better understood, then the quanta has to be fully understood. Otherwise, the hard problem of consciousness is here to stay. Now we will move on to the second portion. We have looked at the question of ontology, which is what is consciousness? The second question is, how do we know that there is one? And here we will put two approaches. One is the direct experience, and the second one is hypothesizing. The first one is the direct experience. So We may ask this question. Yesterday, there was an interesting reference, a conversation between Einstein and Tagore. How did Tagore know that this is the state of reality? So we've seen what mind is. So it's the field that we're talking about. It's the field made of the quanta that, as we have referred in the presentation. And this is at a specific state of frequency. And when EEG readings go as low as 4 to 7 or 0 to 4, this field starts to resonate with the continuum itself. We believe that at theta frequencies, which is 4 to 7, the biofield starts to resonate with the quantum spins of the cosmos. Everything, any matter in the cosmos is made of quantum spins. And when this resonation occurs, there is information transfer. And that's how these philosophers tend to know about how the cosmos formed, what is the order of function in the cosmos, etc. The second phenomenon is the delta frequency. This is close to 0 to 4. And this is a scenario where the biofield resonates with the primordial space at vibration. And this is what the Indian knowledge text would put it as Saman Adi, which is same or equal to the origin. And this is considered as the goal of Indian knowledge system. And at this stage, any human being is perceived to be at a state of godliness, just to touch upon the philosophical and the experiential side, which was covered yesterday in the presentation. Now, I mean, care must be taken because we are dealing with science. So the frequency of theta and delta are actually measures of brain processes. They are not the frequencies of the biofield that we are looking at. And therefore, computation of the biofield frequency is an active pursuit of research, I would say. And then the second approach is hypothesizing, when somebody, of course, in the knowledge system will put the direct experience as the best way, as the first method, as the primal method to understand this whole thing. But scientists also go on the other route, and they sometimes get to good level of knowledge. One nice example is Lassage's theory of gravitation. Here he comes something very close to the nature of reality that we're looking at almost 200 years ago. He states the force of gravity is a result of tiny particle moving at high speed in all the directions. And this gives an inward directed pressure on all bodies. And we think this statement is so true as per Indian knowledge system text. The second one, Einstein in his cosmological constants makes an assumption that empty space can have its own internal energy. It's a property of the space itself. And this is so true with respect to the nature of reality that we are looking at. Wheeler further added tiny vibrations in space-time. We also looked at the nature of reality that we're dealing with is actually vibrating, and many other people in the conference mentioned the state of vibration. He adds one more interesting thing: superspace is separate space beyond space-time. And this would think resonates very well with the primordial space concept of Indian knowledge system. And yesterday, a professor from Italy, he also mentioned that the vacuum state of quantum field theory is associated with a minimum possible energy, the lowest possible energy state. And we think that also kind of resonates pretty well with the Indian knowledge system text. Now, further inferences from the same thing. So, as I said, the intent was to kind of transfer some of the knowledge from philosophy to hypothesize inside of science, and then still use it to rigorously run the observation, correlation, and test. No compromise on that space. And here is one interesting example. The author of this work back from 1970s, he assumes that superfluid as a source of all interactions, ether as the superfluid vacuum state, and he uses that to represent the four fundamental forces. He uses that to represent the cosmological constant of Einstein to explain the inflationary universe, etc. He puts in his acknowledgement. He says, he refers to a specific philosopher of India. He says, I stayed in his fraternity for 2 weeks. I had lots of conversation, and the paper comes out of my interaction. So here's one good example of philosophy actually offering knowledge to mainstream science. And this stream, I follow this stream because the researcher is one of the very well-renowned researchers of India, and the philosopher is very well known as one of the Jivan Muktas of Indian knowledge system. So there are some interesting papers coming on these lines. There is an experimental finding that such a superfluid will form spontaneous vortices and it will rotate infinitely. We find, of course, the previous speaker who spoke before me, he has written a very nice paper in terms of using special superfluid medium and the vortex to cover the particle rotation. There's one more author around the same, Fedi, and the compression because of the vibration that we talked about. There's one more author by the name Dr. Sodli, who has covered this particular aspect. And we talked of vibrations patterns in the primordial space. That's also covered in the mainstream in the same lines as superfluid quantum space having a musical master chord, which is nothing but the vibration pattern per se. A fashion like this, an approach like this, where the knowledge from the philosophy is translated to the science as a hypothesis, and then there are mathematical models coming, hopefully in future experimental research will come, is the right direction for physics to go on, or cosmology to go on. The last part of the talk is on nomenclature. So we have 3 levels, as we saw. The first one is in biological level, sentience and memory. The second one is order of function in cosmos. The third one is space of internal energy with a vibratory pattern. Now, if all 3 of them are called with the same term, consciousness, then of course it's going to confuse people. The readers of the literature would find it difficult to follow, or even to scope, or even to define the terminology. And therefore, we would recommend that the sentience and memory may be qualified with a bio at the front, and it can be called as bio consciousness. And all 3 put together can probably be represented with the term omni. Omni says it's ubiquitous all the way from primordial space to biology. This term would cover. Science is coming to know. You may come to know via direct experience. You may come to know via the hypothesizing process that we touched upon. But omniscience seems to be a better terminology rather than just using the term consciousness across all 3 levels. So to summarize, ontology, we looked at the nature of reality based on Indian knowledge system texts. We looked at particle genesis. We looked at consciousness as a property of nature of reality, reflecting via the vibratory patterns of space. And we looked at the connection between mind and matter. In epistemology, we looked at 2 aspects. One is direct experience. The second one is hypothesizing. In nomenclature, we got in a new term called omniscience. So that's about the presentation. This is a little post-credit scene. I let you take a look and give it a smile.
Thank you. Thank you for the interesting report.
Just one more slide. So we thank all the previous researchers who have laid the strong foundations for us to come up with something comprehensive like this. The nature of reality considered in this work is based upon Indian knowledge system texts, as I said. Particularly, this version follows the teachings of philosopher Vibrant Vedatri. Our sincere acknowledgement to the body of knowledge that he has developed, called as Vedatrium, and I can be contacted in the email address below. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Over to you, Maria.
Thank you. Any questions, please?
Yes. First of all, many thanks for this really interesting, although inspiring talk. You represent Indian philosophic system from a little bit different side. It's unusual. Question is what I would like to ask, probably the comment related to the what we previously discussed about this emptiness and the higher consciousness. In the Indian system, in Buddhism, for instance, there is a guru yoga, is a way you can contact with your, let's say, higher teacher in this higher consciousness stage. And the point is that you can, to some extent, transfer your consciousness, whatever biological consciousness or lower consciousness, to some, higher level of emptiness. Yeah. What is the position of this process in your scheme? Because it's not really clear where it's happened or whether it's happened at all.
It of course happens. So as we saw, the mind is made of this particular field. Okay. The field can propagate as radial ripples. And this is what, in such radial ripples, information can be encoded. Meaning, if somebody has an experience of resonating with a spin in the cosmos, that's out there in their field. And the field can be radially, in the form of radial ripples, it can be propagated to be received by a disciple, and thereby they also get that information for it. There's a lot of research that needs to happen in terms of arriving at an information theory, the zeros and ones that could be propagated from such a system. The quantum oscillator work that you talked of is very, very pertinent to this. And what I think is in your oscillator, the frequencies pertaining, if you can run the research with respect to alpha would be in our way conscious, and theta would be cosmic consciousness, and delta would be the emptiness. So if your research can be done in theta and delta, then you may find that this information about the quantum spin, this information about the continuum can be passed on from one person to another person. This is the primary idea of guru-disciple relationships in Indian knowledge system.
But just to understand, this higher consciousness is distributed over the whole wave, yeah?
Yeah, so this is non-locality, yeah. So the idea, this is again a research question. For example, the continuum is all around, okay? It's in the cosmos, it's beyond the cosmos, it has a vibratory pattern, and therefore the information that's at this scale is ubiquitously available. Again, I would put it as a research question. We need to know the frequencies, we need to know the resonation phenomena. A lot of that will have to be quantified, if not measured, at least modeled. But the hypothesis is that it's all around and it can be at a resonating state.
So sorry, once again, the problem, it's a huge problem, but probably we can discuss later on. You know, biological consciousness is something limited. So we are, you know, limited by biochemistry, by our body. And this higher consciousness is something huge. And now we try to project ourselves to this huge field. And there's a lot of question which systems support our consciousness, who perform computation in this field, yeah, from another point of view. Then our complexities, let's say comparing to complexity with high complexity is, you know, something really small. And now we try to understand something much higher, much complex than ourselves. So it seems there is a huge difference even in the complexity. And now I'm not sure how, let's say, from philosophical point of view, you try to connect, you know, something what is not really comparable. This probably, you know, a little bit philosophical discussion.
Yeah, true. What we think is all the computation is actually occurring in this field, and this field is in constant connection with the brain's molecules. So, so this field can also be in a resonating state with the continuum itself, and that's the state where terms like universal consciousness, super consciousness, all those terms would arise. So it's broadly this way. There's also another hypothesis very adjacent to this. I'm working to address that specific point of yours, which is where the computation is performed in a biosystem, or who is doing it. And I think that would be a long answer, and we can take it up offline.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.